All right. So you guys have seen this. It's our boilerplate note that we're not trying to do self-promotion or pitching within our user group content. This is really like thought leadership and just topics for discussion. If you're not in Bevy in terms of trying to stay connected with the mug announcements that go out, the link is located right here. So go in and get signed up. When we send out our promotional invitations for our mugs, you will get them if you're part of the Charlotte Mug group. And then upcoming opportunities, Adobe Summit. If you guys haven't registered, go ahead and register the free virtual event happening in late April. And digital event here, Marketo Engage digital event. This is just a promotion coming up next week, which is crazy that the mid-March is next week already. But also there's a link here to go ahead and register to hear from these leaders that will be talking about the Marketo Engage platform. Time to shine, again, experience award. Go ahead and do your submission. All the links will be in the housekeeping slides. Here's a list of all the mug meeting calendar. Obviously, today is March 10th, so anything before that, probably recorded that you'll have to listen to. Anything after, these are your options. You can see that we've got everything from New York to Japan, you know, out to the Twin Cities. Okay, so our topic for today. So syncing complex CRM systems. I like the tagline, when the native sync just isn't enough. So I'm gonna hand it over to Jay to do some screen share and have him walk through.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen here. And if you could just confirm that I am showing the same slide you were just showing.
You're good.
Awesome. So again, I kind of just introduced myself, but yeah, Solomon, we're a system integrations group. So we work with a lot of different platforms, creating these types of syncs, automations, and integrations. We work in all kinds of different tech stacks. So we work in fintech stacks. We work in HR integrations and data warehouse integrations. I myself, just a little bit about myself. I was born into this area, like I said, through the marketing technology stack. So very familiar with Marketo and Salesforce architectures and things like that. So looking forward to talk to you today about the different options that we have for syncing with Marketo. Typically what I would do here is kind of lay out a challenge, right? And then you kind of pick apart that challenge and then produce some options for you to address that challenge. Today I'm going to flip that over a little bit, and I'm actually going to throw out the options right out of the gate here. So I'm going to review 3 options for syncing data between Marketo and our CRM instance. In this case, we're going to use Salesforce as kind of like our guidelines, a typical CRM here. I'll just note here that the other options besides native syncing, if you're not leveraging Salesforce, I would say you might even be more weighted towards evaluating the other 2 options besides the native sync. We can talk about that in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to roll out those options. We're going to talk through some of the profiles that fit into each of those options. What is a great profile to fit in option 1, 2, and 3, and kind of go into a little bit of use cases that fit for each of those options. Then we're going to go through the pros and cons for each option. And then finally, 2 of the latter options, hybrid and custom integrations. I'm just going to outline some of the tactics that we use and some of the tools that we use to kind of handle a hybrid or a custom integration or a sync between a Marketo and a Salesforce environment that might be complex, or a Marketo and multiple Salesforce environments in the case that Courtney and I had at Avid Exchange. Okay, so that's our agenda for today. So I'm gonna jump right into the options. We're flipping this over a little bit. Our first option, everybody's well aware of, is our fully native sync. So I'm going to start right out of the gate here. As anybody that might be on this call might be wondering, about custom syncs and hybrid syncs. If you can leverage a fully native sync for anything, really, this is a recommendation for any system that has standard and native syncs. Leverage out of the box functionality whenever you can. Always recommend it over customized sync when possible. And I'm going to go, when I go through the profiles, I'll call out, when it makes the most sense to leverage a native sync when you can. Some of the pros out of the gate, and we'll go over this in a little bit more detail, but obviously no configuration and upkeep required, or at least very, very minimal, and no loss of out of the box functionality. We'll see that sometimes, when you gravitate away from a native sync capability in any system, you may have give and take there. You may have more control over things, but you also may lose out of the box functionality. Our second option here is a hybrid sync. So this is when we leverage native capabilities as much as we can, right? And again, always recommended to leverage native functionality whenever we can. But this allows for specialty sync requirements that just can't be covered in the native sync capabilities. Custom objects are involved sometimes, although again, certain instances where native sync can handle custom objects. But if we have a real complex system or really a complex operational process, we may find ourselves in need for more of a hybrid sync, leveraging the automatic syncing through the native process whenever we can, but kind of enhancing that with more custom processes along the way. And then our final option here, of course, is a fully custom sync. So allows for situations when just, the native sync just cannot work. We cannot activate it in our current architecture. And again, I'm going to go over some profiles that will fit that need. And in this area, we've been seeing this quite a bit pop up. In the case of Courtney's challenge, it was multiple Salesforce instances. We weren't able to merge into one. They had two completely different architectures, and our challenge was figure it out. Let's create a sync on our own between those two Salesforce instances in Marketo. This would be a fully customized solution that will some of the benefits that we'll talk about. You have full control of what gets synced over from your CRM system to Marketo in this case, and what any transition or transformation rules at the data level you'll have full control of, which is great to have full control. However, the con that we'll dive into a lot more detail on is what you just signed up for. When you decide to go with a custom sync, you're now owning that layer in between your marketing automation tool and the CRM tool to ensure that data is syncing appropriately. We're not designing for updates happening across the board. Your platforms battling against each other essentially when data is trying to update. So these are the three options. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and jump into some of the profiles. This is your basic architecture for Salesforce, right? If you have one instance of Salesforce and you just need to keep leads and person record data in sync on the Marketo side, and you have native conversion to accounts, contacts, and opportunities, maybe you have some task and custom object items in that single Salesforce instance, everything looks to me like you can leverage a native sync between these two entities, right? And then again, you have your program members, status progressions. You can sync campaigns over. If this looks like your Salesforce environment and your Marketo environment, I strongly suggest that you stick with the native sync here. On the other hand, we more and more through acquisitions and legacy Salesforce and CRM integrations that have a long time period to converge and merge. We're seeing some instances where uh, we, we we see something like this where we have multiple Salesforce instances. We've also seen some clients where not only do we have multiple Salesforce instances, we might have a Microsoft Dynamics environment in there as well from a legacy or a merged business unit or company. So this is a situation where we see potential for a hybrid sync. And what we would do here is identify our core business, our core Salesforce structure. We might even uh, take that Salesforce structure as our go-to architecture and establish a native sync there. So all campaigns can tie into programs in our Marketo in this core business Salesforce instance. But then we have these other Salesforce instances that we still need to take into account in our Marketo environment. And that's when we can start to talk about a hybrid where we install a middleware solution to be able to coordinate data changes from the subsequent Salesforce instances into Marketo. And again, a lot of this profile shows, other business units or legacy processes that we need to track. So it could be something along the lines of, I have these two Salesforce systems that might help me understand opt-in preferences that I need to respect, right? And those Salesforce instances might get fed data like opt-out, opt-in information or preferences that we need to make sure our core system accepts and adheres to. So your syncs here could be as simple as monitor these other systems to check for changes in preferences and manage those preferences in the Marketo environment. And another system that we've done in the past are lead contact ownership tracking. So even though our core business kind of was our system of record for most of our clients, we needed to know if other of these Salesforce CRM systems were the lead generation or the ownership of the lead. And so we would keep a custom object, for example, tracked on the Marketo side. So you would know, okay, in Marketo, I have this lead, and I know it came in through Salesforce 2, but we've also engaged with Salesforce 1 with this client as well. So you can look at the custom object information and say, okay, this particular lead can be marketed to, in the realm of Salesforce 1 and Salesforce 2 business units, but not Salesforce 3, since it has not engaged at all with that client. So that's just another example of a situation where we could have a hybrid sync, again, leveraging native capabilities whenever we can. And then we have other potential hybrid kind of operational tactics that we can have where, even if you have a native sync one-to-one between your core Marketo, I'll call it, and your core Salesforce instance, you could have situations, for example, if we need to create tasks in Salesforce on the opportunity record versus the contact record, for example, functional processes where we need to leverage a middleware solution to say, okay, here's here's the email address of the person. I don't want the task created on the contact level. I want it created on its primary opportunity, for example. And that's an example maybe of a one-to-one Marketo to Salesforce integration where we have kind of custom operations, I'll say, through middleware to handle those particular situations. It's a little different than the graphic that I'm showing here, but it's just another example of a hybrid situation where you're leveraging native, again, whenever you can, but you're using kind of hybrid tactics to be able to create some things that just the native sync can't handle.
Jay, I have a question.
Sure.
Real quick. So I agree with you. I work with a lot of clients that are doing acquisition after acquisition, and those acquisitions come with their own tech debt in terms of like the stacks that they're integrating. So hybrid sync is probably what they're working with initially, right? But like long term, do you see clients moving to like one Salesforce instance, or do people
Absolutely.
usually keep them separate? Yeah, like
Yeah, usually that's the goal. That's
okay,
the end goal, and this is where time frame and value come into play, right? So, the goal in a lot of these situations are, let's go ahead and consolidate into our core instance of Salesforce. We want to do that. We want to get there, but we're 6 or 12 months away, or
right.
years away, so in some cases. And so they're just kind of stuck in these silos, and that's a perfect example of where you're thinking to yourself, which Salesforce instance are we gonna create for our native sync? It probably honestly already exists or in play, unless you're already in the process of merging some of these. But yeah, that's a perfect scenario there, where your hybrid sync in this case is your temporary fix, and that
Right.
temporary fix could be weeks or months or years in some of
Yeah.
these cases. Yeah. And that's why it's very important, at preference level information and things like that. You know, your customers aren't going to wait for you. That they don't care about your your technical issue here. You need to uh, accept you know respect their opt-ins and opt-outs and preferences along the way. So you need to kind of have this middleware type of solution managing stuff like that. Great question. So a fully custom sync profile. In this profile is our use case at Avid that we've been working with Courtney on. So in this case, we have two completely different Salesforce instances at Avid Exchange. One of them, and from a technical perspective, they're very different from a data architecture level. Of course, we can't spend too much time in unplugging all of the data architecture differences, but basically they have one Salesforce instance that manages their customers, and then another one that manages the suppliers or their customers. And we could talk about potentially someday merging those, but the truth of the matter here is that the technologies and the architectures there were so different, they had to keep these parsed out for now. And so this was an example of a situation where we needed to create a fully custom sync between these two Salesforce instances in our one Marketo instance that had to kind of track, who was in which instance. In some case, we do have overlap, and we do have partitions involved on the Marketo side, which is important here.
Yeah,
So,
and Jay, I can just chime in real
oh, hey,
quickly.
Courtney.
So I'm here now. Sorry about that. So when we were trying to figure out the best path forward, we really did evaluate like all the different options that Jay has shared. And the reason we ended up selecting the custom sync is not only for the reasons Jay just provided, but because like having the middleware piece, it did make it more flexible for us. Like if we do get to that point in time where we migrate to like a third org of Salesforce that is composed of both org 1 and org 2, then over time we could just remove the middleware and set up this native sync directly from our current Marketo instance into the new Salesforce org. So that was the strategic decision there as well, to try and like provide options for what may come in the future as well, without having to completely redo our Marketo instance.
Yeah, great point. And that the future data architecture, it is expected to shift. So exactly. And once you can combine those in the future, again, just like the hybrid solution that was brought up earlier, you can leverage the native syncing there. And anything that again isn't covered by native, you can go switch to a hybrid solution and cover use cases from there on out. And then, so perfect timing, Courtney, because I was going to show your slide here that kind of identifies the Avid solution at a high level. And so if you want to just kind of talk through this a little bit, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So this is just like basically when we were going through the initial integration scoping project with like our Marketo team, our architecture team over there. And then we had started talking to Jay and his team. We were trying to figure out like what this might even look like. And so we had this architect map sort of mapped up, which is like the two different orgs of Salesforce, and then it shows the middleware. And then as Jay was speaking, so we have one org of Salesforce mapping into one person partition that we set up in Marketo, and we have org 2 mapping to another person partition. But we have like a workspace structure that we built in Marketo as well. So like we have a best practices workspace, we have a buyer workspace, which is just syncing strictly to like org 1 of Salesforce. And then we have like a global workspace, which is for some of those programs that we really need to sort of determine upfront which org of Salesforce we need to map the data to. So for like contact us forms on our website, things like that, where we are trying to input the data from Marketo and determine which org of Salesforce we need to push it into. And then we have a separate workspace just for supplier that's mapped into this separate partition. So that's sort of a little bit about how we've structured it internally. Is there anything else you think I should add, Jay?
No, I think that's perfect. I just thought it would be a good idea to kind of, talk through that. And organization is a very important piece of that, right? Like organization
sure.
on the data side and on the workspace side when you're talking about different architectures being integrated into your one Marketo solution.
Yeah, and honestly, something that's been like huge for us is naming conventions across the board, because we have two different partitions, but all of the fields that we have to build and map over live in the same place. So even having a naming convention all the way down to the names of the fields that we have in the admin section, so we know, oh, this is the opportunity type for the supplier partition versus the buyer partition. So that is another little added layer of complication as well, but a naming convention is greatly helpful in being able to like distinguish between the difference.
Yep. And I'd like to tell everybody, Courtney, about when we first evaluated all these options, and you asked, are we crazy for thinking about even doing this custom integration? And I said, yeah, we're crazy. We're in MOPS and we're not Salesforce admins. If we weren't crazy, we'd be Salesforce admins.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, evaluate from top down. Can I meet my needs through native integrations? If I can't, can I leverage as much native capabilities as possible with maybe enhancing that sync with middleware? And if you can't do those two things, now you start to evaluate a fully customized sync process. Usually using middleware, which I'll talk about some of the tools in just a moment. But before, and the tactics, what kind of tactics do we have available to us to be able to keep this complex custom syncing process up and running? But before I do that, I just kind of want to quickly, we talked about a lot of these pros and cons. I really don't need to go over them on the native sync, much less configuration, like I said. You don't need resources to support as much as you do the other ones. You set it, you forget it, you turn it on in Marketo, and you can see the schema sync over. When you create a field in Salesforce, if it's exposed to the Marketo sync user, it ends up in Marketo. That's all great stuff that you don't have to think about, right? The cons here: flexibility, throughput management. What I mean by that is a lot of folks on this call probably deal with backlogs and throttling on the Marketo sync. especially when you first roll out your project. Sometimes you have to wait quite a few days, weeks, maybe, depending on the size of your database for things to sync over. With these other options, you have a little bit more control on that. On the hybrid side, I kind of already mentioned this, so I'll go over this a little bit quickly as well. But you decide, right? You decide what needs to be handled through middleware and what you're going to leverage on the native sync side on a hybrid sync. And then future requirements, if you run into something that isn't native, then well, you have a potential solution that you can customize on your own. I mentioned before, we have some clients, a number of clients that want to create tasks off of other objects in Salesforce, and we can make that happen. When you plug in other launch point partners that might not have native syncing capabilities or their native process, you run through this same methodology and say, well, I love this launch point partner, but their native sync doesn't do exactly what I need to. Well, now you have options for things like that as well. So that's definitely a big pro on both hybrid and custom. The cons on the hybrid side, you are going to have to monitor this custom syncing. And of course, these are very similar between hybrid and custom. It's just the scalability of how many resources you need to dedicate. We have a lot of MOPS friends out here that they're a team of one. you got to know what you're signing up here for. If you're going to take control of that middle layer, the syncing, and you're going to have full control over it, it's great because you have full control. You decide what happens. You can change data on the fly. You can really be quick to deploy changes at the sync level, which all of us probably would love to have that capability. But again, you're signing up to manage that, just like you've already signed up to manage Marketo, right? So it's just a consideration there.
And then I will say just like little things that we don't always think about, like with this, the native self-healing sync, like if a field gets changed on the Salesforce side and the Salesforce admin does not let me know ahead of time, it breaks the sync, like the data is not passed through exactly the way that we need it to be. So once you sort of put processes in place to like account for all those things and make sure you're getting included in conversations for changes that are happening on the Salesforce side, it definitely helps eliminate those. But that's just another example where like it's a little bit more of a lift on our team.
Yeah. And on the other side of that coin can be this monitoring and maintaining piece. So if you're maintaining the sync on your own through middleware, for example, you have the ability to ingrain monitoring within that sync. So with the native sync, Marketo's done a great job where they're starting to expose more and more information about what's erroring out, things like that. But with a hybrid or custom sync, you have full control over what is working and what's not, and if there are any anomalies within that sync, you can create a Microsoft Teams channel for monitoring and things like that. You can really get proactive on issues or errors that come up, so you'll know when something changes that you didn't know about. You can design appropriately. But again, that takes a well-designed thought process that you need to dedicate resources to this middle layer here.
Jay and Courtney, like when
Sure.
you guys were talking and trying to decide what route to go, obviously Courtney lives in the MOPS world at AvidXchange, but like who else did you bring into that conversation? Like probably your CRM team, like
So we talked to like our Salesforce admin team. We have like a IT like data architecture team. So they were really involved in just like the overall integration conversation from the beginning, and also just in terms of like the tools that we were selecting. So they really helped us walk through all of the different options. Like we evaluated if IT were to try to build something out internally using like Azure, what would that look like? If we got like a bigger tool like Informatica, where IT would manage most of it, like what would that look like? And then Workato, like a Trade.io were our sort of other tools that we were evaluating. And we ended up selecting that one, even with IT's input, because of just the level of flexibility it gave us, like understanding how much monitoring and things could go wrong, I guess, that our team needed to be like in the day-to-day operations of. Like, it made much more sense for the tool to live directly within our team, and a tool that we could easily go in and update. Also, like our team being the subject matter experts in Marketo and Salesforce, not IT, like they would have to learn all of the platforms. So they even came to the same conclusion as us, that like y'all need to own all of this, which was really, really nice that we were all aligned. But those were the key stakeholders that we brought in from the beginning. And then I was really adamant about, like, we had a really tight timeline. We only had 3 months to stand up everything, our Marketo implementation and our integration into these 2 different orgs of Salesforce. So I was really adamant about finding a partner who knew all of the tools like back of their hand, who could help me go and execute as quickly as we needed to. And that's where Jay came in, because I could just see the writing on the wall with what it would have happened if we continued like doing this with just IT. Like, not that they're not great, they are awesome resources. Like I was saying, they just would have had to learn everything. It would have taken a lot longer, and not allowed us to be as flexible as we wanted to.
Yeah, and that's a great, like there's this spectrum of native sync on this side and custom sync on this side, and as you slide towards the native sync, you're obviously with the business, with the marketing operations side, and as you get more towards a custom developed solution, there's a middle ground there now with some of the tools that we'll talk about in just a moment, but you now, gaining ownership of that again gives you the ability to control that, and you being the marketer, understanding what needs to be done. Yeah, you're taking on a little bit more, but now you have a lot more control over what happens and when and things like that. So I think that's a great point, Courtney.
We had a question come through, Jay. I don't know if you saw it in the chat log, but it's from Michael, and he's asking, what additional challenges do you face with a hybrid / custom and its sync when clients have multiple SFD sandbox testing that's required before going to production?
Yeah, great question. It's always difficult to kind of manage multiple instances. So not only do we have 2 or 3 or 4 Salesforce environments, but now we're kind of going into the matrix style of, okay, we have UAT and production and development and QA. When I talk about some of the solutions on the middleware solutions, some of these no code, low code iPaaS or integration services allow you to easily point between one instance to another. Some of the challenges there, though, are of course data schemas being different between lower environments and upper environments. That's a whole other conversation sometimes on the IT side, where we need to make sure we're not changing API names and things like that, because now that we own a lot of this, when we promote configurations up from lower environments to upper environments, we have to obviously smoke test and make sure that those things aren't gonna bite us. But when they do, and sometimes they do, right, Courtney, we need to appropriately change that. And as we get closer to production, those promotions of that code, I'm saying code, the configurations up through the production, as you get closer to production, those get less and less. Hopefully, that's definitely one of the challenges between moving code between instances, just like regular coding capabilities. But yeah, that's a great question. It's definitely something that you need to keep a close eye on.
Great.
Okay. So some of the tactics that we have and when we initially had conversations, Courtney and team and I, about what kind of tactics are we going to use to, let's say, sync data from Marketo to Salesforce, or from this Salesforce to Marketo. There's a lot of different options that we have. In the case of active syncing, we kind of coined this phrase, right? Where we're like deciding actively, when somebody fills out a form, I want to trigger in real time as quickly as possible. And in some cases, some of you out there are very interested in speed to outreach and things like that. Let's get this data over to Salesforce as soon as possible. And so we coined this phrase about active syncing. In Salesforce, in Marketo, we could create a webhook where we're triggering the middleware to execute a sync between Marketo and Salesforce. So this is just a kind of a high level process where on the left side here, I have a snapshot of a webhook coming out of Marketo that includes in the URL the lead ID of the Marketo lead ID and the Marketo program name of the program that's actually initiating the webhook call. That information gets transferred over to the middleware, and then the middleware kind of controls the sync from there. You can see on the right side here is an example of a webhook that has a full payload in it. These are just two different tactics. Just telling your middleware to say, hey, this is the ID, go ahead and take care of everything, or here's all the data that I'm extracting out of Marketo, for example. Don't come back to Marketo, hit the API and things like that. We went with the left side here, where we're providing lead ID and program name to our middleware solution, and then our middleware solution takes that information and goes through a process like this that you see here. Pulls all the necessary data back out of Marketo, checks Salesforce to ensure that the program is in sync with the campaign. If it's not, it'll create the campaign. That process is a whole sub process where we make sure that the campaign is created appropriately in Salesforce. All the campaign statuses are in tune with the channel on the Marketo side, and all kinds of things like that. And then it will go on from there and either update or create a leader contact, and also will create campaign members appropriately for reporting. So an active trigger sync to tell your middleware to go ahead and coordinate all of that information. There's a lot of stuff underneath these steps, but I just kind of wanted to show you, the difference between an active sync here, providing just bare minimum information to your middleware, versus a much more heavy, I'll say, webhook to go out to your middleware, just providing as much information as it needs to do what it needs to do. So that's an example of an active sync. Passive syncing is more like, in this case, this is a screenshot of our middleware solution. It's Marketo again, where we're monitoring Salesforce for changes in batch. This is just an example of a passive tactic where we're just, on an hourly basis, on 5-minute basis, we pick up a batch of new leads in Salesforce, and we can upsert them into Marketo. This is not even how we have ours implemented. I just kind of wanted to show you just a high level example of how that might occur on a passive basis. And so, where it's more reactive than proactive, right? So on the Marketo side, when somebody fills out this important form, it will go ahead and call the webhook real time, get it over to Salesforce. In this case, we're just taking batches of information and bringing it over to Marketo. And I've also included here, I think I mentioned this before, we could have like a Teams channel that we're going to post errors to. If we ever have an error job here, we can post into a Teams channel where MOPS can monitor that and say, oh, this hour, there seems to be an error. There's links to the integration processes, the leads that are impacted in Salesforce, and whatever you need to monitor from there. So this is just, I wanted to show you this as an example of one of the pros of a custom integration, where you really can have a handle on issues that come up over the course of time. Managing limitations with Marketo integrations, custom integrations here. Everybody probably runs into this every now and again, but we do have limits on the Marketo side. When you have a customer hybrid sync, you of course need to keep your daily limits always in mind when you're designing this stuff. How many do we expect? That real-time sync, for example, I'm sending the ID to the middleware. The middleware is communicating back and hitting a Marketo API, pulling information, maybe going back and forth a bit. So it's just important to take into account what your limitations are on the Marketo side, especially that daily sync. Just a couple of pieces of information, folks probably already know on this call, but you can see what your limitation is in admin web services. In this instance, it's 200K. I think out of the box, it'd be like 50K.
Yeah.
And then you can click on the requests in the last 7 days, and you'll actually see, your different integrations in your system, like who's using. In this case, our middleware is probably the biggest user of the API. Totally makes sense since we're managing custom integrations here. Just a couple little tips and tricks there on how to kind of navigate and see who's using the API and who can, right? Like if I navigate to launch point, I can see all of the services that at least could leverage the API. And
sorry,
yep,
Jay, not
sure.
to take off, but I think it's important to call out how, like, everybody in this phone call probably knows this, but I work with people who don't always know this. But setting up an individual API user for each one of your systems that's going to be like using that API pipeline so that you can troubleshoot, because without that, it's all of your API calls are rolled into one user and it's very hard to troubleshoot of what's happening.
Very good point. Yes, excellent point. Because when you do leverage the API quite a bit for something as important as keeping your Salesforce system in sync, if there is a problem out there, you want to be able to pinpoint exactly where it is so you can shut it down or fix it appropriately. And some of that error monitoring and handling I mentioned earlier can be indicators of that, right? Like if I get an error, it might not be in the integration process. It might be related to usage or another API user that's just kind of not following the rules of these limitations. And I have a couple of those listed here. So, you can talk about concurrency issues and things like that. So there are instances, there are limitations on how many times you can hit the API in a short period of time to monitor attacking on the API and stuff like that. So yeah, that's why error handling is very important. And then I just want to also mention kind of another benefit of managing your own sync through middleware is you can now plug into external systems and see trends and things like that. So we could log errors or even successes for that matter to data warehouses and reporting tools like your data warehouse, your SQL servers, or Snowflake, or if you have a system like Splunk or something like that, where you can monitor usage a little bit more than the out of the box functions. Okay. The last thing I'll mention here on different tactics, although there are a lot more, we just don't have time to go through them all. There are other tactics where we can use middleware to monitor at the program level, where we set up in our system, for example, different tags where we can use endpoints at the API at the asset level and monitor for whether or not a tag says list upload sync yes, then we can trigger a middleware process to pick up data in bulk, for example, from that program and keep things in sync. So there's a lot of different tactics. These are the types of tactics that you can really get a lot of benefits and create cool automations for, usually after you kind of roll out your standard custom sync. But in this case, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Courtney. But in this case, we can kind of ensure that all campaign members are in sync between one program and another in Salesforce, for example.
Yeah, it's just been another cool way where, like, because we have more of the active sync, so we're really determining at the smart campaign level like what we want to sync over. This tactic has allowed us to go back and sync the program members again, like handle a list upload directly via a tag. If it's like a larger list, we send it through like a different workflow in our middleware, so it can be like more efficient versus our standard sync. So it's just really cool in terms of like how you can customize the sync when you are using a tool like a middleware to handle that.
Awesome. Cool. So yeah, those are the tactics I wanted to kind of outline. Again, there are a lot more details at a custom sync level that you need to take into account. But one of the last things I wanted to leave the group with is, what is the development and the timing of this? And we talked a lot about the middleware solutions. And Courtney mentioned for our solution we use Marketo. But with the low code, no code tools are on the rise these days, right? And what that means is puts more power closer to the business side of things to be able to manage things like this custom sync. I have just a couple of middleware solutions up here. You also mentioned Courtney Tray. Sorry, I didn't add that on here as well. But I put them up here in this format for a reason as well, because on the left side are the more low code tools, on the right side a little bit more geared towards IT, right? And that's those are the conversations that you need to evaluate when you do need to do custom sync like this. Is who's gonna own? Like I said, there's a lot of team of one MOPS folks on this call, I bet. Do you want to sign up for something like that, have the control over that, or do you want to gravitate towards the right side of this, where you have a Mule or a Boomi Informatica, where IT would probably be doing the development steps on that, and you'd be giving them the requirements on what gets synced and where, and then the change management process for that side of things is going to be a lot different than if you're on the left side of this chart, where you're owning these processes and you can change usually a little bit more quickly and things like that. Vertify is another great one too. Thanks, Ellie, for mentioning that. That's another great tool in this space as well. The importance of the requirements, no matter what, is not going to change. Planning and requirements you need to do if it's just Courtney and I developing a custom sync between Salesforce and Marketo, or if it's IT. We did, Courtney mentioned, we had a really quick timeline to do this. So that's why, number one, we stayed on the left side of this chart, but number two, we also really kind of controlled our scope. What is on the critical path to roll out first is super important, because we're still working on some of this. We'll come up with ideas on how we can improve batch syncing and things like that. It's always going to be a work in progress. And we, by doing this, we're allowed to be able to improve using these low code, no code tools to do things like communicate with Microsoft Teams, and maybe in the future through lead management processes, call out to data enrichment programs as people fill out forms. There's other situations where we hit fraud prevention services, or even internal in-house databases and things like that. So what this does is, it reduces your timeline to a point where you still need to organize around that. But it also opens the door for a lot of other opportunities for automation. So I just wanted to point that out as well as kind of a closer. And and the wrap up again, we went through the three options, provided different profile types that fit those options, went through pros and cons, and showed some tactics here. And that's all I had. I didn't know if I'll hand that back over to you, Courtney and Christine.
I can just elaborate real quickly on Jay's last point too, like opening the door for additional automations. I do feel like the way in which we've set up our architecture at Avid Exchange, it has opened our team up to like more collaboration with IT. Like slowly people across the organization have started to learn about this tool called Marketo, and they're starting to get really interested in what it can do and like how we can integrate some of our other enterprise systems into Marketo or Salesforce in a easier to scale, more manageable way without like another IT resource. So in that sense as well, I feel like we've positioned like our MOPS team to really be a part of that broader automation as a whole that's happening like across our entire technology stack. And that's really exciting for us too.
I don't know if anybody in attendance has any extra questions. Appreciate the ones that came through our chat box. And Jay, thank you for going through all of this. I know this is probably something we could chat about for like the next 24 hours, but
Sure.
yeah.
Definitely true.
Yeah, but I think if we don't have any other questions, we could probably wrap up. And like I said, we recorded this, and you know, the slides for the housekeeping, be sure to check out the links in those. But yeah, appreciate
Awesome.
everybody joining us.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it. Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.